Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. It was confirmed today that UFC featherweight champion Alexander Volkanovski will serve as a backup for the lightweight title at UFC 280 in the main event, Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev. So in the event, Charles Oliveira was to miss weight or get injured the week of the fight, same thing with Islam Makhachev. If one of those guys in the main event were to pull out, we would then get Charles Oliveira versus Alexander Volkanovski or Alexander Volkanovski versus Islam Makhachev for the lightweight title instead of the current main event that is Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev for the lightweight title, which I'm dying to see. And I just think the thought of Alexander Volkanovski stepping in and, whether it be for Charles Oliveira, whether it be for Islam Makhachev, I just think it's a horrible idea by the UFC. I think it's a horrible idea for each fighter who's currently in the main event. And I think it's a horrible idea for Alexander Volkanovski himself. And the reason I wanted to make this video, because I already made a video about the same topic about a month and a half, 2 months ago, is because that was just pure speculation at the time. Volkanovski said, I might be the backup. I want to be the backup. But it wasn't confirmed. But now it's confirmed that Volkanovski will be the backup. He will be traveling to Abu Dhabi, and he will be ready to go in the event one of the main event fighters pull out. And I've seen nothing but universal praise of this move. And a lot of people are saying, well, now no matter what happens to the main event at UFC 280, we will still have an amazing matchup, because they're thinking, well, now we either get to see Charles Oliveira versus Alexander Volkanovski or Volkanovski versus Makhachev. If in the event, absolute disaster hits and we don't get to see Oliveira versus Makhachev. And I think that's completely wrong. I don't think it's a good idea, and I absolutely despise it. And I have so many reasons why I despise it. So first off, before I even get into that, if you don't know what a backup fighter is, quick synopsis. The UFC sometimes in the event of big fights, they will pay a fighter in the same weight class of whatever title's being defended most of the time. Sometimes it could just be a main event, no title on the line. They will pay a fighter to train as if they're fighting on a certain date, and then they will pay them to weigh in at the weigh-ins. In the event something happens to one of the fighters, they can step in. And so basically Volkanovski would be getting a full training camp. I assume that he's been training, and he will weigh in the day before UFC 280. And if one of these guys fall out, he will step in. They've done it in the past. I think Khabib versus Justin Gaethje, they paid Michael Chandler to weigh in as a backup, and they've done it countless times. I can't name them all off the top of my head, but they've done it before. And you look at Oliveira versus Makhachev, this is an amazing matchup. I absolutely love this matchup for so many reasons. I mean, you have the potential GOAT status of Islam Makhachev's leader in Khabib Nurmagomedov on the line. I think if Charles Oliveira defeats Islam Makhachev, he takes lightweight GOAT status, even though that's a controversial thing to say. I think you also have the lingering backstory of Charles Oliveira losing his belt on a technicality, before he fought Justin Gaethje because of the slight weight miss and the issues with the scale. And, you have all these stories just looming. UFC 280 main event is one of the greatest fights on paper I have ever seen for all those reasons. It has an amazing backstory. Stylistically, it's one of the greatest fights I've ever seen in my entire life. You have two guys on long win streaks, and I know Makhachev hasn't fought the greatest of competition, but still, you have two guys on really long win streaks, and then on top of that, you have the fact that Islam Makhachev's, main training partner and coach is Khabib, who was the lightweight champion right before Charles Oliveira was there. So you have the whole storyline of this is kind of, Charles Oliveira versus Family Dollar version of Khabib Nurmagomedov. So it's just such a compelling fight. And, that's kind of my first reasoning is I don't want to see this fight changed. I don't care who gets injured. And this is going to make a lot of you guys want to punch me through the screen right now. But if Makhachev or Oliveira get injured or miss weight and one of them has to pull out, I'd rather the main event be canceled than watch Volkanovski step in. And I know that sounds insane. And don't get me wrong, Charles Oliveira versus Alexander Volkanovski is a great fight. Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski is a great fight. But the main reason I don't want to see this is because why should any of these guys have to fight on short notice? And I know somebody's going to be in the comments and say, well, if Volkanovski's training and has a full camp, and Oliveira's training and has a full camp, and Islam Makhachev's training and has a full camp, how is that short notice? Okay, it's a massive stylistic change for Islam Makhachev to go from fighting Charles Oliveira to fighting Alexander Volkanovski. And the same for Charles Oliveira. It's a massive stylistic change to go from fighting Islam Makhachev to now fighting Alexander Volkanovski. And for Volkanovski, he has no idea who's going to pull out. So he could be training for Makhachev and Oliveira, or Makhachev ends up pulling out. He could be training for Oliveira. I know he's probably doing a general training and just, getting ready for whoever could possibly be in there. He's a super well-rounded fighter. But still, I don't think it's fair to any of the three fighters, to any of them, that if one of these guys were to pull out, basically they're fighting a totally different stylistic matchup on bare minimum a week's notice. I mean, we're 2 weeks out right now, so it would have to be in the next couple days. Next couple days, we're going to be a week out from the fight. So I don't think it's fair to go from fighting a Makhachev to now fighting Volkanovski. And what it does, it's not really that exactly, but what it does is it puts an asterisk on the fight. Do you think if Charles Oliveira pulls out and Volkanovski steps in and Islam Makhachev loses, do you not think he's going to say, well, Volkanovski's a much different stylistic matchup than Oliveira and blah, blah, blah. And there's all those built-in excuses. Same thing for substitute any fighter in. Do you think if Islam Makhachev pulls out and Volkanovski steps in and then he beats Oliveira, you don't think Oliveira is going to be saying the same thing? Most likely. It just puts, and even if the fighter themselves do not say it, a lot of the fans and the promoter's going to be saying it, and Dana White's going to be saying it, oh, well, we probably have to do a rematch. So then we have a case where now the division gets log jammed because let's say Makhachev pulls out, Volkanovski steps in, he beats Oliveira. People are going to want Volkanovski versus Oliveira too, okay? So now you're holding up the lightweight division. And not only are you holding up the lightweight division, you're now holding up the featherweight champion because Alexander Volkanovski, or the featherweight division, because Alexander Volkanovski is the featherweight champion. And you have a couple contenders at featherweight. You have Josh Emmett waiting in the wings. Some people want to see Yair Rodriguez fight for the featherweight title. So not only are you now holding up the lightweight division, you're holding up the featherweight division. And on top of all that, I mean, there's so many reasons why I don't want this to happen. And I get it. Short term, a 1 week notice Oliveira versus Volkanovski fight would be absolute madness. Or vice versa, Volkanovski versus Makhachev fight would be madness. And it's a high level fight. It's a fight that I would be excited for. But this is our one chance for a massive fight. I mean, we could have two massive fights, really. Because what I'm trying to say is, I think the winner of this fight between Oliveira and Makhachev versus Volkanovski in the near future, 2, 3, 6 months down the line, is a massive super fight, okay? A legitimate super fight, particularly if Charles Oliveira wins. He will be a champion that defended multiple times, regardless of what the actual, what it says on paper about Oliveira losing his belt. I do not think we should essentially rob Peter to pay Paul to get Volkanovski in there on 1 week's notice. We need a proper buildup if we're having the featherweight champion step in to fight a lightweight champion, to move up in weight. I want to see Volkanovski versus Oliveira, and I want to see a 2-month buildup, a 2.5-month buildup. I don't want to see it all thrown together in 1 week. This would be a special fight. Volkanovski fighting either of these guys for the lightweight title to become double champion does not deserve to be thrown together on short notice. And, I'd be really disappointed if it happens because at the end of the day, would it be a fun fight? Would it be a great fight? Would a lot of people be excited for it? Yes. But if it's not a serious injury, if it's not a serious issue, I think reality says if Oliveira has to pull out, if Makhachev has to pull out, the card behind it is amazing. Keep the card as it is. Reschedule Oliveira versus Makhachev down the line. If it's a serious injury, let's say Makhachev tears his ACL or something along those lines, then you book Charles Oliveira versus Volkanovski in a couple months. Even December would be fine. We could get a true build-up. It's a massive fight. And, rather than just throw it together last second, I just don't think that's the way to go. I think a lot of people would agree with me. I think a lot of people aren't thinking along these lines. They're just thinking, I want a big fight at UFC 280. And don't get me wrong. I'd be disappointed if we lose this main event and they just cancel the main event and they don't look for a replacement. But I think it's the right thing to do because Volkanovski on short notice, it's just there's too many things wrong with it. And I'd rather see, especially if it's just a minor injury or a cut in training. I'd rather them just reschedule Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev, December, January, whatever it may be. And I'm praying this doesn't happen. I hate even talking about it because I really don't want it to happen. And then maybe you have Volk fight Josh Emmett in the meantime. And then the winner of those two fights. Can you imagine, guys? I want you to think of this. Imagine if Charles Oliveira defeats Islam Makhachev and then Alexander Volkanovski goes out there and let's say he starches Josh Emmett in December. I'm just making up, it could be in February. There's talk of an Australia card in February. Can you imagine the buildup for that true super fight between lightweight champion Charles Oliveira coming off a win over Islam Makhachev, and then you have Volkanovski, who's defended his belt, against Max Holloway twice, Brian Ortega, the Korean Zombie, and then Josh Emmett. Can you imagine the buildup of that fight? Can you imagine the hype behind that fight? It would be amazing. And I get it, short term, you'd be like, okay, well, let's watch Volkanovski fight one of these guys in the main event. But I think at the end of the day, it's just a net negative. I just think it's not going to end well because whoever loses is going to have an asterisk, going to have excuses for it. We're going to have to see it probably ran back, and then it log jams 2 divisions, and we lose. At the end of the day, we would lose out. Regardless of what happens, we will most likely lose out on Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev, which I personally can't stomach. This fight is the fight that I've been most excited for many years. This is a fight that I have not been more excited for a main event of a UFC pay-per-view probably since Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor. That's how excited I am for this main event. And I think a lot of people would agree with me. If it came down to you, this is the question I want you guys to answer in the comments. If it came down to you, would you rather have Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev rescheduled for the near future in the event of a minor injury, or would you rather have Volkanovski step in and replace whoever's injured at UFC 280 on short notice? I'm genuinely curious. Am I crazy here? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.